We are in the prophets, and today we are in Ezekiel's book, the 37th chapter. We are in the historical period where God's people have been pushed out of the chosen land of Jerusalem. The temple has crumbled, and they have been forced into exile in Babylon. And as the days turned into weeks, which turned into months, which turned into years, they would plea, O come, Emmanuel. Come and save us. You have forgotten us. You have let us go. You are not fulfilling the promises you have made to be with us and to restore new life in us. Everything that we are begging and pleading for has not come. O come, Emmanuel. This is a story again and again and again that we read as God's chosen people have been forced into exile, as they've been placed in the situation where they have nothing of their own and are having to live and worship and follow the rules of their kings. And they wonder, much like we do, when things don't go our way, when life is difficult, when we can't make sense of the events surrounding us, where, O God, O where have you gone? Why have you left us? Why have you left us? Why have you forgotten the promises you have made to us? O come, Emmanuel. Lamenting is one of the different collections of writings that we have in the book of Psalms. The Psalms are chock full of a variety of different writings, and the laments are one of them. And a lament is simply that. Why, God, have you allowed this to happen to me? Or, God, this has happened to me. Where are you? Why are you not here? Why have you not heard my plea, heard my cry? Why, God, have you failed to live up to your promise to always be with us? Now, the Psalms are also full of celebration and thanksgiving. Please don't hear me that the 150 chapters of Psalms are full of lament, but they certainly are a decent chunk of it. And I bring up the Psalms and the Psalms of lament because there's a necessary connection that the prophet Ezekiel is making here. See, Ezekiel is telling us about a vision. You know, when you read something, we have to understand what we're reading. This vision of walking into this field of dry bones, this is not a historical account of what happened to Ezekiel. Ezekiel did not walk out into Johnson High School football field and see it chock full of dry bones and then allow the breath, the Holy Spirit to come upon them. This is a vision that Ezekiel had that came from God, which I think is important to remember. But it's a vision and it's a story that Ezekiel told to give a word of promise to God's people who are pleading again and again and again, O come, Emmanuel, rescue us from living in exile. And to bring them a word of hope, Ezekiel, makes a connection back to the Psalms in the sense of lament. I want to read for you just three different Psalms that talk, three lament Psalms that certainly talk about this using bones in the midst of their lamenting. The first is Psalm 6. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are shaking with terror. My soul is struck with terror. While you, O Lord, how long? From Psalm 22. But I am a worm and not a human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your causes to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one whom he delights. Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth, and since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near me, and there is no one to help me. Many bulls encircle me. Bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravaging lion. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then finally from verse 17. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. Finally from Psalm 102. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my distress. Incline your ear to me. Answer me speedily in the day when I call. For my days pass away like smoke, and my bones burn like a furnace. My heart is stricken and withered like grass. I am too wasted to eat my bread. Clearly, the sense of bones and connected to lamenting is this idea that they have been cut off from the larger body. They have been dismayed. They no longer are connected to this body or in Jerusalem, this promise of this promised land which God had declared to them. And so in the midst of their lamenting, they continue to be aware that God simply has abandoned them. Or at least they think. So Ezekiel brings to them this vision, and this is a vision of encouragement, and this is a vision of inviting those who are living in exile in Babylon at that time to be reminded that indeed God hasn't forsaken them. God hasn't abandoned them. God is there with them, and He uses this field full of dry bones to make that story come alive. They would know that bones were connected to this lamenting, and they would hear this story where God came to Ezekiel and said to go and prophesy to this pile of bones. And eventually what happens? As the breath, the ruach, which is the Hebrew word for spirit, the Hebrew word for breath, human breath, it says that the breath, the spirit comes from the four corners, and that there is new life blown upon these dead bones, and they come to life again. There is newness. There is new life created among these dry bones. Ezekiel is saying, don't lose faith. Although it is different, although it may feel like death, there is something new that God is doing, because God fulfills God's promises to never abandon, to never leave, even when it feels exactly like that. This is a word of hope. This is a word of promise. And I think it's necessary to also recognize that this is new life. This isn't necessarily resuscitation. That it's CPR when somebody collapses and falls down. One can use CPR to resuscitate them. No, death has happened. They have been pushed out. They have lost everything that they knew. They are living in exile. But even in the midst of death, there is new life that can take place. There is new promise and there is new hope that they can anticipate and wait for. I mean, what a word of encouragement for us today. Now, maybe you don't feel like your dried up bones laying waste in the wasteland waiting for this new life to come. But I certainly think there are times and situations where we have felt that as a community. I mean, to be very honest, the 2000s have not been kind to those of us that are Lutheran in the United States. And it's not just Lutherans, those that are Protestant. If you take a look at statistics of numbers in church attendance, and it hasn't just been since the 2000s. For the last 25 years, we have been going like this. Less and less people are making the decision to make a church community a priority. And we could sit and analyze, well, why is that? What's wrong with them? I think that's wasted breath. The reality is we've been in this decline for a long time. And I have said, and I've heard you say, maybe not you particularly, but you as a member of our congregation, what are we doing wrong? Why aren't we growing? Why aren't we experiencing newness? Why can't we be like we were back in the 70s when everything was just great? Because it's 2017. That's why. When you experience loss and decline, we do this funny thing of if we could just go back to the glory days. If we could just push rewind and make it all like the 70s again, this church would be thriving and growing and there'd actually be good things happening here. Gosh, God, why have you failed us? Why have you let us down? Where are you? There's nothing good here. We feel like dried up, withered bones, cut from the family, all entirely disconnected. That's what our mind does. We want to push rewind and go back to the good old days, to the glory days. Because in this moment and in this time, it feels like we have been abandoned. We have been left alone. We have been deserted. But see, I don't think the Spirit of God has stopped blowing over us. Not one day. Sure. Maybe there are less people worshiping at this church and all the Lutheran churches in the United States. Sure, maybe we aren't as big as we once were. Maybe we aren't doing as much as we once did. But not once has the Spirit of God stopped blowing over us and blowing into us new life. I don't think God has abandoned us at all. The fact of the matter is, change happens. There is ebb and flow to this life that we call faith. We can go on and on and on and why people aren't coming to church. Let's not worry about that. Let's celebrate, name, and acknowledge from where the Spirit of the four corners is blowing over us as a church and celebrate who we are as a church. Because there is so much to celebrate here. And just because it's different or looks different or feels different, never once has the presence of God escaped from this church or any of our brothers and sisters' churches around this country. God is still at work. I am 100% confident of that. If you want an example, just go outside these doors and look to the right and the pile of gifts that are there. And when you walk by, just mentally say ×2 because we have as many gifts that are there in Pastor Amanda's office that we just put off into storage. You are the living body of Jesus Christ, knowing that you have the resources to be a gift to our community. People we will never meet, people you'll never come in contact with. But because of your faith and the Spirit of God blowing over you, you are willing to give out of your own pocket for those that have less. We have 60 families who are connected to Farnsworth Elementary School who have food over the weekend because of you. Because of your generosity and your willingness to give above and beyond, so those kids who are experiencing food insecurity have a meal over the weekend until they get back to school on Monday. We have 10 students right now in Tanzania who will get to, it's midnight there, who will get up in the morning tomorrow and go to school because you have given out of your resources so that they too can go to high school and then to college and then to get a job. So for us to think, it just doesn't feel like church anymore, that's not the truth. God is at work, and God is at work in really, really big ways. Sure, maybe death has happened in some capacity, but God has not abandoned us. We are alive and we are doing well. And so this word from Ezekiel this morning, this strange vision of if you stop to think about it, it's a little weird. But if we look at it as a word of hope, a word of promise, a word to remind them and us that God is in the midst of it all. And sometimes death does happen. But there's new life that can come out of that. We are days away from celebrating God's greatest declaration of never ever giving up on us with the birth and the arrival of His Son here on earth. We can't lose sight of God's promises. We can't let go of the promise that God has given to us. And as we continue to declare, O come, Emmanuel. Come to us, God. It's not so that we might be able to start something new, so that we can continue to be the church, ones who have received this gift of Jesus Christ, whose lives are transformed by this gift, so we can then continue to go out and have an impact on the world. That's why we exist. And there is a lot that God is doing through us. And so I say thank you, O Emmanuel, for coming to us, to breathing life into us, so that we too may celebrate the gift and then reflect that gift out to the world. Amen.
Amen.